light wind. To all of you leaving us here, on behalf of Revolution Airways, Captain Carter and your crew, it's been our pleasure serving you, and we certainly hope you've had an enjoyable flight. Thank you and have a good day.
Through the uncertain June weather of the subarctic, the tiny aircraft carrying the joint British-American Kayak expedition touched down on the narrow gravel airstrip, carved out of the mountainside in Dutch Harbour, one of the Aleutian Islands in far western Alaska. The Aleutians are the remarkable string of volcanic islands that stretch in a 1,000-mile arc out from the Alaska coast across the wild waters south of the Bering Straits towards Asiatic Russia. And the interest of the expedition centered on two of the biggest islands, Umnak and Unalaska. The expedition had flown in from Anchorage, 700 miles to the northeast, which gives you an idea of the extraordinary length of this remarkable island chain. Its purpose? To recreate the amazing voyage undertaken in prehistoric days by the Aleut Eskimo hunters and warriors in their kayaks, the Eskimo type of canoe. These ancient kayaks had been specially recreated in Britain and flown out to the Aleutians.
Well, we arrived at last.
That was a good second.
Dutch Harbour was called Amaknak by the Aleuts, and across the sound lies the main island of Unalaska. These islands are lonely with a sparse population. The land is gaunt, treeless, wrapped in mist and storms, with snow lying on the high tops far into late summer. A tough, inhospitable country. And the Aleut Eskimos settled along its edge, not for the agriculture, that was a thankless task in the Aleutians, but for the seal hunting, even though the seas around the coast are some of the roughest in the world. Curiously enough, the Russians came across the Bering Straits in the late 1800s and annexed Alaska. And this little town of Unalaska, with its remarkable Russian church built in 1826, was the capital of the valuable Aleutian fur trade. The great Dutch harbour base near Unalaska was a vital part of the American defences in World War II against Japan. It's hard to think that once 40,000 men were stationed here. Now the base is abandoned, and the cold Aleutian wind sighs and whistles through the broken windows and rusting doorways. But little Unalaska still survives and calls itself a city, with its couple of houses on the sea's edge, where the expedition first unpacked the crates, bringing the kayaks from Britain, and an unpleasant surprise.
Oh, there's one damaged. Oh, no. Oh, hey, look at this. Looks like we've had visitors here. Whoa. Look at this one here. Oh, anybody with a spare deck? Oh, what else has gone? Have a look. Oh my goodness. Here, one of the tents. What? Oh, not a tent. The fairies have been in the night. It's a good start, isn't it?
It's not fairies, but mice, who'd had a grand time gnawing away at the equipment.
Inside. Look, if you let me know what you've got missing or broken, look, I'll write it down. I'll get a checklist off and see what we can do.
Unalaska is no longer a center of the fur trade. The big money lies in fishing. The American trawlermen came for the salmon, the halibut, and above all, for the king crabs, which swarm in these chill waters. The Japanese clamor for king crabs, and a catch like this means big money. In the one bar at Unalaska, the trawlermen crush together like the king crabs, and if you want to stand around, you ring a bell and put down 300 pounds. In the harbour, old Liberty ships are anchored. They're used as canneries, and as most of the output goes to fish-mad Japan, the workers here are Japanese. They're flown out for the 2 seasons. The American trawlermen work furiously to supply the demand. In 4 months, they can earn $340,000 each. And as we look at these wealthy workers, I can't help but think back to the first settlers, the Aleut Eskimos. They were a remarkable, tough, resourceful people. the first people to master the art of living in these savage subarctic conditions. They hunted the seals and other mammals that then swarmed in these waters, rather than relying totally on the fishing. Then their most important piece of equipment, the one thing on which their whole economy depended, was the kayak, a type of canoe curiously constructed out of skins and wood. The Russians called them bidarkas. In 1954, there was still one left. The Aleuts specially paddled in it for the camera. In boats like this, their ancestors first came to these islands 8,000 years ago, paddling across the Bering Straits. Now, this last kayak is in the museum. The expedition introduced the younger generation of the Aleuts to the replicas of their ancestors' kayaks, in which the 5 men from Britain and America were planning to retrace the journey of the first comers to the Aleutians 8,000 years ago. The starting point was here in Unalaska. First, the kayaks had to be carefully packed with the stores and supplies. They had to be self-sufficient for a month, so it was important that these fiberglass kayaks should be perfectly balanced.
A bit weight at the front and the back, and get the clothing so we can get at it quite easy.
We'll put one big bag up the front.
And you can get the awkward items up in the bow, awkward shaped things. To watch these bags don't leak. Stone's too heavy.
Yep.
How far down?
You've got 2 inches at the back.
Then came a short trial trip
Right.
to see if the kayaks would glide smoothly over the vast beds of kelp that fringe so much of the island shores. Some of these kelp fronds can be 40 feet long. A kayak is about the only type of boat that can penetrate some of the thicker beds.
It one little bit. It's open open sea. Yeah, you're right.
The evening before the departure. A promising sunset, but no one trusts any promise the weather makes in the Aleutians. It is totally unpredictable. Next morning, the great day. The whole population of Unalaska turns out to wish the expedition a safe and successful journey. The kayaks are launched. The 300-mile voyage begins. The leader of the expedition, Derek Hutchinson, a teacher from South Shields. He designed the kayaks. Dave Hellowell, a post office engineer and canoeing instructor in the north of England. Dave Rayburn, an accountant, organizer of the expedition. Phil Walton, engineer, and the expedition's strongman. George Peck, the American in the team, a judge in the town of Seward, Alaska. The expedition sets its course across Unalaska Bay. Here they were in waters which saw the visit of another British explorer, Captain James Cook, nearly 200 years ago. The expedition skirted the deceptively named Cape Sherford. The weather held, and they reached their first landfall, Reese Bay, before dusk. Surprisingly in the Aleutians, flies and gnats, those infuriating plagues of the subarctic during summer, are seldom a bother. They are swept off by the almost constant wind. But on this first day, there had been little breeze. These insect pests were everywhere. But they were, after all, a minor annoyance. What happened next was far more disturbing. A storm struck. One of those furious, sudden, unannounced storms that are an Aleutian speciality. That night the wind roared in from the north. Heavy seas thundered onto the shore. For George Peck, it was a disaster.
It just broke the pole. It didn't even break at a seam. It just broke it. Just smashed it.
What we're doing tomorrow, eh?
Well, the weather at the moment is diabolical. There's no way we're going to go out there
No,
and paddle either 16 or 24 miles with the weather like this.
It was worse earlier on. It's dying down a bit. Well, too much of a...
Outside the bay, the weather became more threatening. The tents had to be moved to the welcome shelter of a great wooden barge that had been washed ashore in World War II. All that the expedition could do was to remember in patience the laconic Aleut proverb, "The wind is not a river." In other words, you can't control the wind, you can only wait until it dies down. But the delay brought one benefit. The canoeists could explore the remarkable coastline within the shelter of the bay. A huge cave seemed to have been punched through a volcanic rock by the pounding fists of the winter seas. A cave like this, as anyone knows who's tasted the adventure of canoeing at sea, is an irresistible challenge. The expedition immediately got swallowed up in its echoing darkness. Out into a breathtaking amphitheater, where dozens of waterfalls tumble gracefully from the snowfields of the plateau above. Jutting high into Reese Bay is the menacing prow of Winslow Island. It's alive with the crying of countless seabirds, puffins galore and cormorants, nesting on the precipitous cliffs. In the days of the first settlement, Winslow Island was used as a lookout by the Aleuts. They posted lookouts here to watch the sea for approaching storms and for enemies during times of warfare. The Aleutians are covered only by treeless tundra, but here is one compensation. They are plentifully supplied with driftwood, carried here by currents from both Asia and America, which also bring in huge glass floats that were formerly used on their nets by Japanese fishermen. Ahead along the route was a whole string of towering volcanoes, but the expedition could never use them as sea marks for guidance. They were always wrapped in constant cloud and mist. Finally, the expedition could wait no longer. The kayaks just had to be launched through the wild surf to resume the voyage. The canoeists could almost feel the presence of the unseen volcano Makushin towering somewhere above them. The cold winds from its icy slopes whipped their faces. The recent volcanic rocks of the coastline are still being carved by the restless sea into low, dangerous reefs and strange pinnacles. One of the strangest is known to all seamen in the Aleutians as the Irishman's hat. Further along the coast comes the first glimpse of the remarkable animal life of the Aleutian shores. At Bishop's Point is a big rookery of Steller's sea lions, presided over by several large bulls. They always challenge man's presence loudly, but fortunately the threat of the bulls simply consists of a great deal of bellowing and a few weak charges. They look clumsy on land, but once they're underwater, you see almost a different animal, a study in grace and beauty. After 60 miles of some of the roughest kind of sea canoeing in the subarctic, the expedition rounded Cape Kovrishka and came gratefully into calm waters again. Not without a new respect for those first Aleut voyagers who took this route many thousands of years ago in their frail kayaks. Makushin Bay, and ahead, a hope of rest in Makushin village. But sadly, Makushin village is deserted. The war and the Japanese attacks disrupted the old Aleut way of life, which depended on subsistence fishing. Of recent years, the modern trawling industry, with its efficient fishing technique, has swept the old Aleut fishermen from the seas. The old houses, built long ago in the style imported by the Russians when they ruled the Aleutians, now stand ghostly in the cold wind. Even 30 years ago, you could still film fishermen like George Berenin, spearing salmon in the old style at Kashiga, just a few miles along the coast from Makushin. Then the bright salmon still swarmed in to breed in the shallow waters. But now few salmon run in this stream. This part of the north shore of Unalaska is a lost, deserted land.